Hello everyone, so my name is Sally Blake and today I will be talking about building a AA studio from startup to fully funded. Just so you know a little bit about me and why I'm here today to do this talk. I've spent 10 years in the industry. I spent 6 years of those in AAA at Ubisoft, 2 years at an AR and VR company called Dimension, and then 1 year in publishing at No More Robots. I'm also the founder of an organization called Women Making Games, and that helps to support women in the industry, mainly in the north of England. So yeah, that's kind of my background. Also, more importantly, I got pictures of my pet sheep. So her name is Martha. She needs to feature in all of my presentations. So there she is with her favorite Pikachu toy. And yeah, she's just living her best life. So I thought you all need to see that before I start. I'll tell you a little bit about Silent Games as well. So we were founded in 2018, and it was co-founded by myself and my business partner, Joseph Rogers. We're based in Newcastle upon Tyne, very, very far in the north. And yeah, we spent many years delivering AAA titles. I worked on Watch Dogs, The Division, Just Dance, and a few others. And the goal now is to build a AA studio that gives players a specific focus. It's RPGs, focusing on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And we have a new IP in development with a focus on cooperative multiplayer to bring players together in new and innovative ways. So just a little bit about the studio. We haven't said much about the game yet, but I wanted you to know the background. And about our company history as well, just so you know where I'm approaching this talk from. We were founded in 2018 after we left Ubisoft. We had a partnership with Teesside University that helped us make our first game demo, which I'm going to talk about later because that's a good option for you if you're looking to start your own studio and you're kind of strapped for cash. It's a really good way to start. We also had an angel investment in 2020. And we were also awarded the UK Games Fund grant, which was really, really helpful at the time. The pandemic had just hit and all of our kind of meetings that we were planning to go to had dried up. So that was a really good injection of cash that allowed us to, again, feed into the demo. And after that, we started, once we'd completed the demo, completed the pitch and got everything kind of up and running, we then started pitching to everybody. And then in November 2020, we were acquired by Amplifier Game Invest. And they're a Swedish investment company that's owned by Embracer Group. And Embracer Group own things like THQ Nordic, Deep Silver. They just recently purchased a company that makes Borderlands. So yeah, a really big company. And that means that we've been able to grow to 18 people. And yeah, we don't have to worry about the money anymore, which is always nice. We can just focus on the game. So I'm going to talk about like the lead up to that. And hopefully if you're, trying to start your own studio or you're currently running your own studio, I can give you some tips on how to get the initial funding and some other things to think about as well. So today's talk covers 4 key areas. They're quite broad. I think there could be a presentation of each of them, but I wanted to start at the high level so that you can go away and do further research and look into things yourself if there's something that particularly interests you, depending on where you are in your journey yourself. So firstly, that's establishing your studio vision. So if you haven't taken the leap yet, it's a really good thing to start thinking about first. What kind of studio you want to create, etc. A little bit about early fundraising. There's a couple of things I'm not covering because there's loads of information about them, but we did some kind of weird and interesting things to try and raise money in the early days, which might be useful for other people to know. Pitching to publishers and investors. Again, there's lots out of this online, so I've just added a brief note about that and how to approach that. And then also how your company culture forms as well. So those are the kind of 4 key areas that you need to think about when you're starting up a company. So I wanted to cover them all. So firstly then, establishing your studio vision. If you haven't yet taken the leap, I always say that you need to think about why you want to build your game studio, not just what it's going to be and how you're going to do it, but the why is the most important thing, because when times are stressful and you're trying to sign deals or you're pitching and things like that, it's really important that you always have your why to grasp onto. And this can be things like you want to create a certain type of game, or you've been doing the same thing for a long time and you want to do something different, or you want to create a studio that has a very specific company culture. And there'll be all sorts of motivations that you will have, but it's important that you kind of figure that out and grasp that in the very beginning. So that's why I always start with that. But secondly, there's a couple of things that I recommend thinking about when you're starting your studio, and that is your brand pillars and your production pillars. These are sometimes called different things, but essentially you'll probably see that they're the gist of it's the same. Brand pillars are talked about quite a lot, but production pillars not so much. So I wanted to cover both of them. So brand pillars are essentially what must all of your games do to be recognizable as a game from your studio? So if you think about the studios that are very successful, they usually have a common theme or a common focus, and they build on things that they've done in the past. So it's not just kind of a scattershot approach to making games. They have a very specific value system and things that they want to create. And also, what you want players to feel when they play your games? That's a really important thing to think about when you're establishing your studio brand. And just generally, what do you want to be known for? What do you want people to say when they say, "Oh, this is a Silent Games game," or "This is what I think of when I think of Silent Games," or your own company, for example. And then production pillars are essentially the how. So the brand pillars are the what and the why, and the production pillars are how are you actually going to achieve those things. So it's how do you want people to work together? What methods and processes do you want to put in place to achieve your brand pillars? And this can be production processes or team working methods or how you structure your studio, whether it's remote or work from home or everyone in the office and things like that. So it's something that you can think about when you're establishing the beginnings of your studio, essentially. So yeah, I think that's a really good starting point if you haven't got anything yet and you're just pondering it. Yeah. I wanted to give you some examples of our brand pillars because I think that just illustrates the point to be able to see them. So we've got 3, and essentially these are taken from a book by Dan Pink about intrinsic motivation. And so this is what autonomy, mastery, and purpose are things that motivate people to do certain things, and we want our players to feel the same. So autonomy in our context is basically we have a meta loop in the game that's meaningful to the player. They're able to make choices in the game narratively, and also it's an RPG, so they're able to make choices with their build. Mastery is basically a sense that you're always progressing towards something, you're always getting better at something. And by the very nature of having an action RPG, that's something that players will continue to do. And then a purpose is generally a sense that you're belonging to something bigger than yourself, you're part of a community, there's a reason for being, there's a reason for doing. And so for us, that's asynchronous cooperative multiplayer, because you can be part of the community without playing with other players in real time. So that's how we established our brand pillars. There's so many ways to go about it, but we wanted to start with kind of, I guess, psychology and kind of go from there. And obviously we love RPGs as well, so we've got to have that element in there. In terms of the production pillars, there's 3 that we really wanted to determine, which fed back into the brand pillars, really. And we wanted a really strong feedback culture where people could be honest and feel safe to give each other feedback, whether it's critical or positive. And that was really important to us in the beginning. So we hired people that kind of had those values as well. We wanted to have a very defined but adaptable process. So depending on the size of the studio and your background, some things can be, some people like to go with the flow and have a bit more chaotic way of working. Others like to have a more defined process, particularly in AAA, that's the case usually, sometimes. But for us, we wanted to have a very clear process, but we wanted to be open to changes if people were giving us feedback. So that was another pillar of ours. And then also leveraging new tech as well. We're happy to kind of roll the dice on new technology and take that risk because we're a very small but ambitious studio, so it's important for us to do that. Some other studios like to play it safe and do work with established things, but for us that was another pillar. So hopefully those examples give you an idea of what kind of things you'll be looking for yourself when you're creating these. In terms of building a vision, it's a huge thing to start for your studio, and it's something you can ponder over months and years, to be honest. These are some books that I read previously that I found really useful. So Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Most people have seen his talks around starting with why. Build a Brand in 30 Days, I found really useful. It's got like a really cheesy kind of title, but actually it had some really good practical information in there for how to build a brand that kind of speaks to the audience and kind of says what you want it to say. And then When to Jump is like a series of anecdotes from people who've taken the risk to leave their company and start their own, because that is a very terrifying thing to do, especially if you're not rich. So, it's one of those things that can be scary, but there's loads of examples of success in that book. So I recommend having a look at those for further reading. And then after this talk, if this is something that you want to do, think about your why and write it down, come back to it, refine it over time. Think about what would make the studio truly yours and have your signature on it. I think it's really important that you're passionate about what you're doing and you're doing something that you really believe in. So think about what would make the studio yours. And then also think about how you would achieve your why. So what would you have in place? How would you want others to work with each other? So yeah, those are things to think about in terms of your studio vision. Hope that makes sense so far. Next up then, early fundraising, because I know this is an obstacle that most people face very early on, especially now that a lot of publishers and investors require a demo rather than just a pitch, and so you need to be able to fund that work. So there's a few things that I'm going to cover. So contract work, university partnerships, and angel investments and grants, because these are all things I have experience with. I'm not going to cover crowdfunding, Kickstarter, etc. Apologies if you were interested in that. There's lots and lots of resources out there about that, but we didn't do it ourselves, so I didn't want to talk about something I haven't done myself. Likewise, with other types of pre-seed investment, there's loads of information online about that. So I just wanted to cover the things that people might not necessarily be aware of straight away. Just some housekeeping tips as well. Before you start fundraising, obviously your business must be formally set up usually as a limited company. You want to make sure you've got an accountant set up because you don't want to do that yourself, trust me. Any insurance is taken care of. And also for investment, it's good to have your shares set up correctly so that the investor can take those shares if you want to give some equity out. Same with having all your contracts in order as well. So if you have a co-founder or a partner or there's people in your studio, even if you're really good friends and you know each other very well, you should always have your contracts in place because investors will look at that just for the housekeeping purposes. And then also the UK has video game tax relief and R&D tax relief, which is very attractive to investors. And it's something that you can raise in your pitches and stuff like that, and something you should look into in the beginning because that really helps kind of sell it to investors. So in terms of the contract work then, there's obviously pros and cons to it. You're free to choose your schedule and your timing. It's not money you have to pay back, etc. And it can help you invest in the early kind of hardware and software that you need and just get you up and running and off the ground because you'll have to make everything to do that contract work. But then obviously you need connections to begin with to find that work. And it can be a very time-consuming thing. You can get absorbed in the contract work and not start working on your own stuff and your own IP. So you've got to be very careful about how you manage your time. So I just wanted to make that clear for anyone that's thinking about it. In terms of how we did it, it was kind of weird, I guess, but we got kind of not. Some industries do it like this as an agency, but we created something aside from Silent Games called the Silent Collective. And I was basically responsible for scouting and the contract negotiation and all of the project management on the project. And then we had a bunch of freelancers who were basically people that we knew. Actually, a few people that had just been made redundant as well. So they were looking for work and they wanted that kind of help to network and find work. And we focused on 3D asset creation and animation with that. And so I would contact the client and work with the client and I would also pay the freelancers their usual rate like this, but then I would charge a little bit more on top for the client. So they would get that project management and they would get all of that reassurance that things will be done on time. As well as that, if you are a collective of freelancers, it can be a little easier to get work than just being by yourself because you have a bigger portfolio, you're able to take on bigger projects, so you're able to get more money. I wouldn't say this was incredibly lucrative, but certainly in the early days when every penny counted, it made a difference. I gave all of the money that I made I didn't make any money myself. I was actually working full time while we were founding the company as well. But so I gave all of the money to Silent Games for that. So that helped tide us over. And we had one employee at that time. So that money went towards their salary and things like that, as well as some other grants that we had. So yeah, I thought this was just an interesting way to do it and something to think about. If you are a group of people starting a studio, it can be something that you can think about and get that early kind of money coming in that you don't owe anyone else for. In terms of the university partnerships, this was really, really good. This was better than I expected. I actually thought we would have a lot of responsibility and I guess like a burden, but actually this has worked really well for us. Universities often fully fund internship programs, so you can essentially get paid interns that you're not paying for, because we didn't want to do unpaid internships. We just felt like that wasn't the direction we wanted to go for our studio, but Teesside University, the one we partnered up with, paid for them for a period of 12 weeks. And so that allowed us to make the demo. There's some longer internship opportunities as well. So that's a really good way to get your kind of demo on the go, especially if you have more senior people mentoring them as well. So I recommend looking into that. Some programs have different terms. So some are partially funded and some are fully funded. So you just have to check that in advance and see what you can do. Another thing that's worth noting as well is that some universities, you're able to access certain funding pots if you do it with an educational institution. So that can be really helpful because you can't do that alone. And they also often apply for lots of grants and funding themselves. So that can be really helpful because they know how to get that money, and so they can help you do the same. So we've definitely utilized them for that. And they also let you use their facilities for free or discounted, which can help in the beginning. So mocap, audio, all that kind of stuff, they usually let you do that. So I wouldn't underestimate the power of having a good university partnership. Yeah, it definitely helps. In terms of angel investments then, I've got a really brief note on this. We had a friend who used to run a mobile studio and wanted to invest. We did try to find angel investors that we didn't know, and we actually found this really tricky. One of the things I would say is try not to give too much of your company away at the beginning, because that makes it much harder later for bigger investments, which is a mistake sometimes people make very early on. It's like they give 20% of their company away for a small amount because they really need it, and I totally understand why, but it makes it harder later if you've given too much away. And yeah, my friend Nick gave us his life savings, and I was terrified that he'd never get them back. But this is my photographic representation of Nick coming in, investing in us, which really helped as well. And actually, Nick works for us now. He's a level designer at Silent Games, so he believed in us, and it worked out for him, and he's made some good money on it from the acquisition. So thanks very much, Nick. He wasn't too happy with this Photoshop job, but he let me put it in, so I think he's not too mad. And then grants, so just a few notes on grants. There's 3 that I'd recommend looking into, and some of these are not just grants, they're like mentorship things as well. The UK Games Fund, again, like I said, this is what we got for our demo. They were super nice and helpful, and it was quite an easy application process compared to some of the others that we applied for. And actually their round 8 is now open. I think it opened like yesterday or today, so they're accepting companies to pitch for. So I definitely recommend doing that. And if anyone's interested in doing it, then you can talk to me after and I can tell you kind of how we went about it and got that funding. There's Creative England as well, and they do a variety of things. They do startup loans, mentorship schemes, some grants and things like that. And I think they're more recently been having a focus on games and, trying to get into games as well. And similarly, Innovate UK, it's not game specific, but it's a big kind of technologically driven funding pot that you can access. I would say that the Innovate UK stuff is quite involved, so you need to dedicate a good amount of time if you're going to do an application for that. But again, there's some really good support available for that kind of stuff. There's also some others that are outside of the UK, so there's Epic Mega Grants, but I know that they've got a backlog of people trying to get the Epic Mega Grant at the moment, so it does take some time. I think we applied 2 years ago or a year ago, and we haven't heard anything back yet, so it takes some time. I do know some people that have been successful there, and yeah, especially if you're using Unreal Engine like we are, so yeah. So just some things to think about after this talk then. Obviously investigate which pots you are eligible for. There's lots that probably everyone is eligible for if you're working in games of the ones I've mentioned. Calculate the funding you would need to make a start on pitch material and or a demo. So for your pitch, you probably need concept art, and you probably need maybe a trailer, especially if you're making a big game, like a narrative flavor trailer and things like that. So you do need to know how much that costs, and then you know which pots to apply for and how many you need to apply for, essentially. It's silly to do that in the beginning. Check what offerings local universities have to offer you, and then make friends with rich people and ask them for money. I don't know, that might work. I attempted it, kind of worked a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of everything that I would say about early fundraising. So I hope that's helpful. And there were some things on there you might not be aware of. So next up then, pitching to publishers and investors. Like I said, I haven't gone too much in depth with this because there's so much out there already, but I just wanted to point you in the general direction if this is the kind of thing that you're doing right now. So I already mentioned having your business formally registered and the accountant, solicitor. You'll definitely need a lawyer for that process when you're going through an acquisition or a publishing deal and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to have that sorted in advance. All your relevant domain names and trademarks and things like that, you should have processed by that point. You want to make sure that all of your IP protections are in place for your game so you can actually go and pitch and it's secure. And the insurance for your employees and all your equipment is set up because they usually check that as well. So just a few housekeeping bits before you start. So there's 5 things that I usually like to see in a pitch. I used to work for a publisher, so I've been on kind of both sides of the coin, pitching and seeing lots of pitches. So firstly, obviously, this is basically, is the game good? You've got a clear vision for the game. It's got really good pillars, hooks. It's got a unique selling point. It's got something that's really interesting from the get-go. So your game has to be good initially. But there's lots of other things that need to be good as well. So one of the things that I actually kind of underestimated was how much the experience of your team and the viability of the execution of the project is. Like, my experience in AAA did count for a lot. And having a lot of years behind you does count for a lot. It gives a sense of that you know what you're doing and that you can ship a project and you've seen it before. So I definitely think that helps, secure investment and make people feel comfortable with investing in you. So yeah, that's something to think about. And also we had like examples of the kind of people we would hire, and that reassured people, and everyone we wanted to hire did jump on board when we got the investment. So that made them feel like, oh, okay, that's you did what you said you were going to do. So that's cool. A reasonable and practical budget and timeline is very important, and this is the thing that people often struggle with the most, actually, I find when I speak to other indies. My background is in production, so this is something that I was doing a lot of, but I still had to ask for help because there's a lot that comes with a studio budget that's on top of a project budget that you need to think about. And so people from the game industry and stuff were really helpful in, showing me their budgets and giving me a template of how to do that and to just check that I wasn't missing anything important. So yeah, I think that's very useful to look at. A general understanding of the market. So if you're making a game that's super niche, but you're asking for millions of pounds and stuff like that, it doesn't always match up well. You need to have an understanding of how your game fits in with other games that are on the market, what kind of money they usually make, and what you're asking for reasonable. Is there going to be a return on investment, which I think is pretty obvious stuff, but for some reason, like, I saw a lot of pictures that didn't include that. And there's loads of different ways to kind of go about that, but it's important that you have something in there demonstrating that. And then lastly, obviously, a strong demo and representative gameplay and visuals. So it's not just about saying that you're going to be able to do these things. The demo really demonstrates that you can actually do the thing that you're saying. And publishers, I've seen publishers and investors say, oh, we can invest in you on a pitch and stuff like that. But generally speaking, a strong demo of what you're trying to achieve really sells it. And they do usually want to see that. So yeah, those are the 5 things that I'd like to see in presentations normally. And I put a pitch template on my website, which is Plus One Wisdom, and it's got loads of other stuff on there, like blogs and things about our journey and all that kind of stuff. So there's some student-y bits on there, which might not be useful for you guys, but there's loads of stuff on there. And there's some other good pitch templates around, which I link in that same blog. So if you wanted to see other examples other than like ours, that's all there, because I think it's helpful to not start from nothing. So having that template is hopefully useful for you if you haven't started that yet. So yeah, in terms of, like I said, a lot of talks cover the pitching material, but I think it's important who you pitch to and when you pitch and how you do it. So I just wanted to quickly cover those 2 things essentially. So in terms of who you pitch to, I think it's good to pitch to publishers and investors that have similar titles to yours, similar genres. They usually, as I said before, they'll have brand pillars that they want to stick to, and they want to, fund games that they know and understand. So it's good to start with those that are similar to yours. And obviously, they have the same platforms as well. So, if you're a PC console game pitching to a mobile publisher is probably not the best bet, but it happens. So, it's probably not worth wasting your time if it's not a good fit. Another thing that's actually quite hard to find out, but usually generally if you ask around the industry, people will know, is pitching to publishers that publish games within your budget. So we call ourselves a AA, which is kind of a nebulous thing at the moment, but it's essentially, there's 18 of us, so it's not like a small indie with 2 or 3 people. So it's important to know where your budget falls within those brackets and which publishers actually fund. There's some publishers that won't fund less than 5 million, for example, but then there's others that will only fund under 1 million. So you don't want to like waste your time. And we were very upfront about what our budget was. So that meant that people that were interested in that bracket would approach us as well. So yeah, I think that can be helpful to be upfront about that. And then, yeah, if they've invested in companies within the same region, so if they're interested in investing in European companies or UK-based companies and stuff like that, that can be helpful if you're pitching to them. It just saves them hassle tax-wise and setup-wise and all that kind of stuff. So they tend to invest in the same regions. In terms of where to pitch, it's always best to have a direct contact with somebody, either meeting them at something like this, face-to-face, or getting a contact from a friend or being introduced. I always found that to be the easiest route to actually get something that was, seemed viable and have talks that kind of progressed further than just the initial pitch. But if that's not possible, we did do a lot of the Game Industry Biz investment summits, which I actually found really useful. And that's where we met Amplifier as well. So we didn't know Amplify, I'd never met them, didn't have a contact there, but that's where we met them. And obviously our acquisition from then on was done. So I do recommend attending that if you're looking for investment. And then if all else fails and you're struggling to get anywhere with that, some companies on their website have very specific pitching channels. So it'll be a mailing list outside of the usual info mailing list and things like that where you send your pitches to. So if you are really struggling to get a direct contact, I would rather you send it than not do something at all, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that kind of information is probably useful as well to have. We made like a prioritized list of our top priorities and our top publishers that fit the criteria, and we started there and just kept moving down the list, attending the summits and trying to find good fits and things like that. I'd definitely recommend doing that. And then if you're kind of struggling or you've got loads of things in progress and you want to continue, then go lower down the list. And yeah, you'll have all of that sorted. So I think that's a good way to do it. So yeah, after this talk, if you make that list, that'd be really helpful, and you can approach that whenever you like. Take a look at the numerous available pitch templates so that you don't have to start from nothing and that you don't miss anything important out. And then ask other developers for examples of a pitch deck, budgets and timelines, and this helped me immensely. Everyone was super generous with that information. They would even send me stuff that they weren't able to share with anybody else, but it was stuff that they were comfortable sharing with me, which was super nice of them. And even some people would like go on a video call with me and kind of explain their process. So people starting their own companies, they're usually very friendly. It's very scary in the beginning, but everyone's super nice and helps out. So definitely don't be afraid to approach people that have done it before. And yeah, that's why I'm here as well, hopefully to help people out with that. And last, there's, like I said, so much to say about company culture, but there's just some notes because I really think that you should think about it from the very beginning, not just the game, not just exactly how you're going to build your company and all the practical things that come with it. This is a really important thing to think about in the very, very early stages. Some housekeeping bits. Make sure you think about how HR is handled at the company. A lot of very small companies, a lot of startups, they have no HR support at all. And that can be very time consuming for you as a founder. Just contractually, you have to make sure all of your kind of stuff is legally in place. And it's much better to have help with that and much better to see that that's all done correctly and as it should be. So we have an external company called Oculus HR, and they've been really great. They let us know if there's any changes to any laws that we need to be aware of. And it's just stuff that I don't have to think about as much because somebody is on top of it all the time. And they have all of that really good knowledge. So I definitely recommend looking at that. Think about hiring a producer, please. I used to be a producer. I still do production-y bits. So maybe I'm biased by saying this, but it will save you a lot of pain and strife and organizational problems. A lot of smaller companies kind of end up neglecting this a little bit because they want to get the core dev team in first, which is totally understandable. But now there's lots of producers out there that are doing freelance stuff. They're working part-time. So if you don't have a huge budget, even just having someone 1 or 2 days a week can massively help you just in the early days organize everything. And then smaller and independent teams, they're sometimes missing important structural things that you should have when you start your company. So that's things like regular one-to-ones and peer reviews and stuff like that. So I definitely recommend looking up what those meant to be and establishing them from the start, because then, you know, you'll avoid problems down the line. So those are some housekeeping bits. And then in terms of how your company culture is formed, there's basically two segments to it. Obviously, how you lead is one of them. So thinking about what your leadership and management style is, that's obviously something that you learn, and it's something that is a kind of a discipline in its own right, and it shouldn't be neglected. Thinking about whether you've had any formal training or coaching and what experience you have in a leading role. There are some developers that have never been a lead, but they'll start the companies and then they'll find themselves overwhelmed by those leadership challenges. So it can be good to have that experience, or even if you are very technically minded or you're an expert in your field, then find a co-founder that has that leadership or production experience to back you up and complement you. I think that can really help. But then secondly, it's not just how you lead, it's who you hire that makes your company culture. So if you're trying your best to lead correctly, but you hire a bunch of people that don't share your same values and they don't share your same company vision, then you're going to really struggle. So yeah, it's about having these unity of values and diversity of styles is what I like to call it. So, you know, you all have that, you're all working towards the same thing, but how you get there is diversity in that, and that's what makes it interesting. But ultimately, you're all trying to achieve the same thing. And then be very clear about what candidate traits you were looking for when you're hiring. So I wrote a list of the kind of things that I value in employees and what I would like to see. And one of them was like resilience, for example, and the ability to learn from mistakes. And as I mentioned, the feedback culture stuff as well. So I'd written all of that down. And I have interview questions that kind of match up with that. So definitely it's these two things that form your company culture outside of the general structures and practices that you have. Yeah. And then a really quick thing I wanted to share. This is a really good thing from one of Patrick Lencioni's books, which I love all of his books and I've pretty much read them all. But these are the kind of things that lead to job misery. And it's just something to like think about very early on when you're creating a studio, because you can miss out one of these three things and then you can have problems. So the first one is anonymity. So everyone needs to be understood, everyone needs to be valued, everyone needs to have their work recognized, not necessarily by their boss, but other people as well in the company. And they need to understand that what they're doing makes an impact on someone. And that's kind of similar to not being irrelevant as well. But yeah, you just want that kind of, knowledge that you're there and you matter and people are considering you. Secondly is a measurement, which I think indies struggle with a lot because they don't like doing like performance reviews and things like that. And you don't necessarily have to do that in a very structured way, but just being able to measure yourself against your own progress and what the company expects you to do. That creates a lot of security for people. And sometimes you might feel like you don't want to give that feedback because people can kind of figure that out themselves. But it's good to know like how the person fits within the company, and they like to measure that themselves as well. So yeah, I think it's really important that you think about how that measurement is done at your company and how you foster that kind of thing. Yeah, it doesn't, and like it says here, it doesn't have to depend on another person. It can be benchmarks. So either you set up training and they can see their progress over time themselves. That kind of stuff really helps. And then yeah, seeing the results of their work and understanding how it impacts. I feel like games, it's pretty easy to see the impact of your work because you see the comments that players say, you see their reaction to your game, and I mean that's usually the best part of it is seeing all of that. But it's important that you kind of, especially if you've been working on a game for a long time, that you keep the team motivated by telling them the impact that they're having on other players and their colleagues as well, because yeah, that just gives you a great sense of purpose. So yeah, this is from a really, really good book. I'm going to recommend some in a minute. But yeah, that's just worth thinking about when you're creating your company. And yeah, for further reading, there's so many. Thanks for the Feedback is a really good book about like critically receiving feedback. 5 Dysfunction of a Team is about, it's basically like a story written in a story format. And that's just really interesting about certain like personality types within the team. The Upside of Stress, it sounds like dramatic, but I actually found that quite life-changing, because essentially the book is like, you stress about things you care about, and the absence of stress means the absence of purpose. So, I was stressed about doing this talk and scared, but I'm doing it because it's meaningful to me and I hope that it helps people. So there's positives that come with stress as well. So that's what that book is about. There's mindset as well, which you've probably seen, the fixed mindset and growth mindset thing. Again, it's really good for just your kind of leadership things and dealing with setbacks, which you will inevitably have when you're starting something as risky as starting a company. So that's a really good book. And then just for practical anecdotes and tips about games specifically, team leadership in the game industry is really, really good as well. So yeah, I think I'm coming. Yeah, we've got a bit of time. That's okay. So people laugh at me because I crowdsourced part of my presentation, and I asked Twitter things I wish I knew when I started a company. So I just wanted to share some opinions other than mine. Yeah, anything to do with hiring an accountant. No one knows what they're doing either. As I said before, like we all ask each other for help. We all start from nothing and have to learn something. So I put that up there. And then the thing about the grants as well, buying hardware to R&D, to hiring folks, there's lots of stuff out there. Oh, the local council point is a good one as well. We've had some help from our local council. We have like a building that has a mocap studio in it and all that. It's run by the council and they've let us have discounted or free or trial sessions. They just want companies to kind of thrive within their space. So it's definitely something worth doing, reaching out to the council. Obviously, results may vary depending on who you have, but they've been pretty good to us. The video game tax relief, the Kickstart scheme, yeah, a lack of time to do actual development work when you're starting a company. If you're the kind of person that likes to be hands-on, you'll find yourself doing lots of business things, and that's something that you would have to get used to, or like I say, start a studio with multiple people so you can share the workload, registering the trademarks and all that kind of stuff. Lots of good tips from Twitter. There's a few more as well. Yeah, as I mentioned, you want to create an optimal environment where other people will be creating games. Perfection is the enemy of progress, a very succinct and probably useful thing to think about. I struggle with that sometimes. Yeah, companies made simple.co.uk is really good. Get all the admin done and spread your kind of net wide when you're talking to publishers, eggs in plenty of baskets there, multiple plans. And all that kind of stuff. And then, yeah, there's some stuff about equity. I'm going to share my Twitter later, so if you want to read through these in detail, I think there was a few more after I put together this talk. Like, you're welcome to have a look and see. I think a lot of these people are company founders as well, so yeah, you'll be able to get your wisdom from them as well. And then I think this is the last one. So yeah, using tools like Xero or Free Agent, which are like account management softwares from the start, that's really useful. As I mentioned, finding people that fit your company culture, not overstretching yourself, be ready to be adaptable, and always talk to publishers, keep them in the loop. So one of the things that's worth noting when you're going through publishing deals and stuff, the talks can take a really long time. They can take months and months and months. So you've just got to keep checking in and keep that ball rolling. And all the stuff about people management and all that kind of stuff is really useful to know as well. So yeah, there's loads on here. Be ready to fuck it up. If you fuck it up, it's okay. I've done loads of stuff wrong that I didn't know what I'm doing. I've tried and then I've learned and then I've like, oh, okay, that was bad, but now I know what not to do in the future. So that's always a thing that you should do, not worry about messing it up, and just continue on with that. So yeah, that's everything. I really hope that was useful for everybody. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I have a really annoying Twitter hashtag name thingy. I'm very sorry. But yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm happy to take DMs anytime from people that want specific information. So yeah, thank you very much. Hope it was useful. Does anyone have any questions while we're here? Yes. Sorry, I should have given you a chance.
Yeah, a question about your current ownership. So are you, are there any synergies you get from that in terms of any technology platforms or innovation that they bring to you?
Yeah, so one of the big advantages of being acquired by a company like Embracer and Amplifier is that they have those connections already with loads of platform holders and other things like, they have like QA porting studios where we get a big discount, and all that kind of stuff has been really useful for us. And we were doing a lot of that ourselves and having all of those conversations ourselves. They have contact with Microsoft and Sony, and they have, all of their kind of portfolio they're able to share with them and help us with that. And they help us with all sorts of stuff as well. Sometimes the finance side as well, they've helped us with. And yeah, they're very open to, if we need help with something, they'll get it sorted. And that's really good. And also there's a sense that I really like being part of that community because there's other founders who are going through the same thing. And that's very advantageous when we can speak very openly about the things that we're doing and the challenges that we're facing. So we have a regular meeting every month with the other CEOs of other Amplifier studios, and things that are changing in the industry or things that somebody's been through that I'm about to go through, they will have that kind of advice and feedback that's specific to us. And I found that super useful. Yeah, so they help us with all of that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Any tips for approaching early employee compensation? Shares, bonuses, base pay?
Yeah, I mean, I have my own opinions about this, and it very much depends on how you want to run your company. A lot of companies do like percentage-based bonuses based on somebody's salary, but I prefer to do bonuses that are the same across the board. So when you get acquired, there's very specific terms for bonuses and things like that. But for us, we can decide how it's distributed to the team. And for me, I feel like everybody's making an equal contribution to the game. So therefore, they will get an equal bonus, essentially. But most companies do a percentage-based thing. But I think the issue with that is that the people who are on the lower end of the salaries also then end up getting a lower bonus. And I don't feel that's necessarily fair. So I would rather everybody gets the same shared success with the success of the game, and they all get the exact same bonus because their contribution is all equally important, whether they're junior, senior, or whatever. And I feel like their salary shouldn't be necessarily tied to that. And similarly, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but probably important to say, is that I feel that your pay should not necessarily be directly linked to your performance review and should not happen in the same thing, because somebody's performance and talking to them about that, if they're constantly worried about the money side of things and whether or not they're going to get a cut or whether or not they're not going to get a pay rise, that doesn't, I don't think that's conducive to somebody increasing or bettering themselves if they're really constantly worried about that kind of thing. But that's just a philosophical thing from me. Like, other companies do different things and do very directly tie somebody's performance to their bonuses, which is the traditional way to do things. But yeah, that's just how I feel about it personally. And there's loads of different ways to do bonuses, which is like, you know, you can have a yearly bonus. We have like a yearly Christmas bonus that happens no matter what, because that's a nice thing to do. But then also there's ones that are like based on the amount of profit that the game makes and stuff like that. And we have stuff like that as well. Yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah, fab. Okay, does anyone else have any? No? Awesome. Well, if there's any questions you want to ask me after, I'm happy to give you my card. I'm happy to have a chat. And like I say, if you add me on Twitter, you can DM me anytime. I'll try and help you out with whatever you're doing specifically. But yeah, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. So cheers.